Life isn't tidy. What once felt solid might even begin to crack. The map we were following no longer makes sense. And yet, this unraveling may be the most honest part of our journey. Hi, friends. I'm Jem Fadling, and this is the Unhurried Living Podcast, where we inspire you to rest deeper, live fuller, and lead better. Walter Brueggemann called this movement from orientation into disorientation and finally into a new orientation. It's a pattern woven throughout the Psalms, throughout the lives of the saints, and throughout your own story, whether you realize it or not. In this episode, we'll explore how this sacred rhythm invites us deeper into God, not around pain or difficulty, but through it. Let's begin. You may have heard people talking about deconstruction in recent years as though it were a new discovery. Well, how does deconstruction compare to a season of disorientation? And how might people connect with and make their way through either one of them? Well, today, Alan and I are going to have a conversation about a sacred pattern woven all throughout the scriptures, especially the Psalms, and lived out in the lives of countless Christians across history. Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann identifies three major movements in the Psalms: orientation, when life feels ordered and stable; disorientation, when that order collapses through grief, loss, or crisis; and new orientation, when we emerge, often surprised by grace, into a new way of being that we couldn't have engineered ourselves. This isn't just theory. It's the shape of a real spiritual life. It's the shape of our lives. We'll also share with you from our own lives how God has met us in all these various seasons. So whether you find yourself building, unraveling, or beginning anew, this conversation is for you. Well, Alan Fadling. Should I say?
Yes, Jem Fadling.
Welcome to the Unhurried Living Podcast.
Welcome to our podcast.
Well, this is a treat for us. Way back in the day, I think we were actually having these conversations more often on our podcast, but we sort of pivoted to some of our monologues and then some interviews with some cool people that we wanted to be with. But today, we decided to really talk to each other. And just so you know where we're headed, I'm going to kind of be the interviewer, but we're both going to answer some of the questions and have an interaction about this. But we thought this was an important topic. You know, this deconstruction is a word that we've been hearing a lot lately. And so we didn't want to devote an entire thing to deconstruction, but that word really brings up another process that some of us are familiar with, which we're going to unpack. And so I hope this is going to be helpful to people.
Yeah, me too.
So why don't we just dig right in?
And that sounds like a good idea.
Let's get to the three words, the three-part process that I was alluding to just 10 seconds ago that goes along with this idea of deconstruction. We're really going to go straight for the Psalms, and we're going to talk about Walter Brueggemann's insights about the Psalms, right? And here are his three words: orientation, disorientation, and new orientation. So first, let's just start right there. And I'm wondering, Alan, can you just start us off by how do we see this movement reflected in the Psalms? And why would Brueggemann bring this out for us?
Yeah, so that's this idea of orientation, disorientation, and the new orientation is something he saw in the Psalms. Like the Psalms have different ways of approaching God. So, for example, a great illustration of a psalm of orientation is Psalm 1. I mean, it just jumps right in there. It says, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, doesn't stand in the way that sinners take, doesn't sit in the company of mockers. They delight in the law of the Lord and meditate on his law day and night. That person's like a tree planted by streams of water, yields its fruit in season, its leaf doesn't wither, whatever they do prospers." Basically, Psalms of orientation are just Psalms of this faith thing works great. You know, I mean, it's like, if you do this, you can count on that. And it does. It reflects God's faithfulness. It reflects God's constant presence with us. It highlights that if we are a branch abiding in a vine, now to turn to gospel language, we'll bear much fruit. And if we remain apart from the vine, we can do nothing. We'll be more like the branch that's sitting on the ground instead of connected. So the Psalms of orientation are, this is how faith works, and faith is working pretty well. Thank you. But there are some Psalms that sound a little bit more like a complaint or a lament or even a kind of disappointment. So a great illustration of that, so this would be a Psalm of disorientation, is Psalm 73. I'm sorry, Psalm 77. Verse 3 is the one that says, I remembered you, God, and I groaned. That sounds a lot different than Psalm 1. I remembered you, God, and I groaned. I meditated and my spirit grew faint. And then he says, I remembered my songs in the night. My heart meditated, my spirit asked. And then he's got 6 questions. And these are questions of disorientation. They go like this. Will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his favor again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? And has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? I mean, you can hear a very different approach to God, vision of God, experience of God in this psalm, very different than the psalm of orientation. Blessed are. Now, instead of blessed, he feels like, is he going to be rejected? Has God forgotten how to be kind and loving and gracious? So these are experiences that at least this psalmist, and I think all of us, perhaps, if we've been people of faith for very long, we can identify with. So these are the disorientation ones. New orientation is just saying that from within these disoriented places, somehow or another, we gain fresh vision, a fresh vision of God. Maybe it's truer than the vision we had before. Maybe it's more expansive than the one that we've sort of left behind in our orientation places. In fact, Psalm 77, as it continues, really transitions from a disoriented experience of God to a more new and fresh orientation. So verse 10 of that same one, as it continues, he said, then I thought, to this I will appeal, the years when the Most High stretched out his right hand. I'll remember the deeds of the Lord. I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider all your works. I will meditate on your mighty deeds. And so the idea of new orientation is we move through those detaching, disorienting experiences, and it opens us to the possibility of a new place of orientation, a new home for our faith. So that's the 3 sort of movements, and those are just a few particular psalm examples.
Yeah, I'm really glad we're starting by just outlining quickly, of course, the process, because, of course, we are both spiritual directors and we care very much about this transformational journey that we're on. And having ways of talking about our long obedience in the same direction, as Peterson would have put it. There is orientation, there is disorientation. We need to acknowledge that. And there is new orientation. And even as you were just sharing those things, sort of the seasons of the year came to my mind. I mean, in a way, orientation feels a little bit like springtime, right? The way you were describing, just that beautiful, like now it's springtime as we're recording this. The flowers are everywhere. The birds are singing. They're building nests. It's glorious, right? And maybe the disorientation could be like either a long, hot summer or even the cold deadness of winter. Just
long,
that
foggy season.
Oh, Yes, and we all recognize that. And then maybe new orientation feels a little bit like fall. The harvest time. You're
Yeah.
picking the apples, the corn is being harvested. So again, just keeping in mind here, what we're talking about is that we are always in process, and being mindful of that is good. And finding out where we are in the process is good. So let's
Yes.
talk for a minute about why it's important to name these things. And we're normalizing these seasons, right? But especially, can we normalize the season of disorientation? Is it possible that
Yeah.
some modern Christians have lost touch with that part of the journey?
Yeah. I think you and I both have seen this sort of dynamic. I think the great challenge is we assume that faith in God means you're always confident and you're always certain and you always have all the answers to all the questions. And so if you begin to doubt, what you imagine is that what you're losing is God. Like
Mm.
if you start doubting, you're going to lose God. But what we're trying to say is there is a positive work, there's a gift that disorientation gives us, which is we're able to question the faith as we've had it so far. Because let's be fair, there is no perfect human expression of faith. Like all of us can look at our earlier years of following Jesus, let's say, and think, oh gosh, I would not say it that way now. Or gosh, I don't see God that way in this season of my life like I did when I was in my teens or my 20s. And so the challenge is if we don't include the dynamics of disorientation in a robust and healthy life of faith, then what we'll assume is when we feel those things, when we have questions like Psalm 77 echoing in the back of our heads, we'll feel like they're wrong. They're evidence of our faith breaking down. We're backsliding was the word we used to use in the old days. It's an evidence that your faith's busted. It doesn't work anymore. Instead of, no, this is a chance to refine. This is a chance to ask questions. This is a chance to bring these things into friends of God. And basically, disorientation just helps us let go of unhelpful elements of our orientation because they maybe aren't working anymore like they used to.
Well, we're focusing in on the word disorientation right now. And this is when I want to really bring in the word deconstruction. We're
Yeah.
going to kind of do a little bit of a compare or contrast because a lot of people are talking about deconstructing their faith. It's not a new word.
Yeah.
People have been talking about it in recent modern times, for a while now. It sort of hit the airwaves, but it's not a new thing. So
No.
I'm wondering, help us understand, how does deconstruction fit in with what Brueggemann is calling disorientation? How do they go together? How do they contrast?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I have the definitive word, but
Right. Well, of course, we're not.
yeah, we're not trying to claim like we know the final, answer on this. But
Yeah.
one of the basic contrasts I would suggest is that deconstruction tends to be a dynamic related to our belief systems or maybe our faith structures. So there was a way of understanding the faith that we were given, or we're having an experience of faith in a particular church or denomination or tradition. And deconstruction mostly is sort of an assessment of that system or of that experience or that structure and deciding some of that needs to be torn down, some of that needs to be removed. So it tends to be a little bit more outward focused on a belief system or a structure. Disorientation tends to be more of a soul dynamic. It's a facet of our experience of God where at one point, let's say our experience of God felt confident to some degree, felt like it worked pretty well. We felt like we understood everything. We knew what was expected of us, like we're well oriented. Disorientation is that moment where the faith as we've had it so far, the experience of faith, not the system or the structure, but the experience of faith, that soul orientation begins to feel disoriented. this isn't working like it used to. So I think that's really helpful because a lot of the conversation these days is more about structures and systems than it is about personal journeys. But I think being able to find what's happening in you in that movement toward deconstruction is a really important question to be able to lean into. I mean, just as an example, one of my earliest experiences of disorientation came as I sort of brought my confident Baptist experience and beliefs and practices. And then that bumped into sort of the spiritual formation movement. And then it bumped into sort of the contemplative tradition, neither of which felt like a familiar home to me. It felt like a different neighborhood in a way, not like we'd left the house, but or we'd left the faith, but we were visiting a neighborhood we hadn't been in before, and it was a little bit disorienting. And so I was reading things that challenged me, and it pressed me to ask the question: is the faith as I've understood it so far all there is to it? Are there ways in which perhaps I'm being invited to relearn or even to unlearn? So that's just a few thoughts about the deconstruction versus or compared to disorientation.
Yeah, I'm wondering if someone, because some people might say we're talking about semantics here, but I really think there is a difference, especially the way you just described it. And maybe what one thing we're trying to say is, maybe if you notice you're in a thing like this and whatever you choose to call it, maybe just hold all of it with hands of grace, not overdoing it to throw things away that don't need to be thrown away. But it's actually okay throughout a lifetime to make adjustments.
Yes.
Right. We can something works for a time. And we're going to talk about this because we're going to talk about, again, just the first half of life, the second half of life. We're coming up on that in a minute. But sometimes things work a certain way for a certain season in your life, and they just don't work the same way later. And that's okay because you're not 17 anymore. You're not 25. Now you're 45 or 53 or 82. See, these are different places. They're just different eras, and so much life experience has happened. So continuing to hold all of this into hands like that, I'm wondering, as you think about it, what might help someone move through disorientation in a way that's more spiritually formative than destructive? Deconstruction is a different kind of word. So what makes the difference between getting stuck in cynicism, right? And then opening or making our way through to a new orientation. And now we're back to throwing the baby out with it. How do you stop from throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
Yeah. Well, it makes me think we have good friends who a few years ago moved to another house in their neighborhood. And as part of that move, decided that they were going to do a major remodel. Well, I mean, to the point that, right, they lived in the garage and had sort of one back bedroom they could still access, but kitchen and bathrooms and like everything was getting remodeled. I mean, that's a major deconstruction, reconstruction project. But they still had a home. On the other hand, here a number of months back, most of our listeners will know that Southern California experienced a couple of its worst fires ever, the Palisades and the Eaton fires. And here deconstruction was devastation. It was demolition. And for some, their experience of deconstructing the faith has been more like that. It's just been an absolute demolition. They don't feel like they can live there anymore. They haven't found a way to transform the home into something they feel at home in. So I just wanted to use that illustration because I think it's important to realize there is a way forward that doesn't have to demolish and devastate the home of your faith. In terms of some practicalities, I think one of the things I've really wanted to see people do as they come to places of disappointment, discouragement, doubt, whatever, you can do that apart from God, or you can do that toward God. The Psalm writers find a way to bring everything that's in their souls into the presence of the God they're wrestling with, the God they're doubting, the God they're wondering, does he still love me? Is he still kind? Is he still gracious? Like the psalm writer said. So I think we can pray our complaints, our laments, our struggles. We can bring our disillusionment to God instead of letting a disillusionment distance us from God. The other thing is disorientation will feel like a loss of faith. We'll be leaving things behind that we used to treasure. But the thing is that we can see that as a gift and not just a loss. I just think of ways that I practiced my faith in the first 5 years that would not, it'd be like trying to wear baby clothes. They wouldn't fit. It's just ridiculous. It looks silly. And so the gift of this journey is that we may find something more expansive, something that feels more rooted, more true, more fitting, more homey for our faith. But the pathway to that place is going to be through the place of disorientation. What I want people to feel is that there can be a gift in this. God can be with us even as we wrestle with God in the midst of all.
Yeah. I kind of want to put a period or an exclamation point or something on this because I've actually watched some visible people go through deconstruction and actually leave their faith, which is one of the reasons why I brought this topic to you. And I said, I think we need to talk about this.
Yeah.
And so maybe just for a minute, can we talk about why someone would actually, quote unquote, deconstruct and then walk away? I mean, is there a dynamic in there where they're kind of doing what you just said, where somehow in that movement, they separated themselves from God, which I'm not sure how that actually happens, but you know what I'm saying? There's a separateness, and then you walk away because it's in your mind, it all went together. So it must not be true because these things aren't true, or I found out they don't work the way they do. And so then you just throw the whole thing away. And now you've deconstructed and walked away. I've seen someone do that recently. Can you help us even just pastorally? Whether it's us in that mode, or if we're journeying with someone who might be in that mode, is there a pastoral counseling for us here? In that place?
Well, so I think one of the things that I sometimes see, I think you and I probably both see this.
Yeah.
Is that sometimes our orientation is rather narrow and local. Like our orientation is, I'm this tradition, I'm this theological school. And so that is the faith. That's the container. And then if I look at the container and say, that container doesn't work for me anymore, so it's either that container or nothing. So like I have now identified the faith, big circle faith, centuries old faith, global faith. I've identified all of that as my narrow little experience so far in that church, in that tradition, in that theological school, whatever. And I just can't envision the possibility that there's any other way to experience God or to trust God than that little orientation I've had. So one of the challenges is being able to seek God when your experience of him so far doesn't feel like it works anymore. Are you open to the risk of saying, God, would you reveal yourself to me, even if the way you do it surprises me? Maybe even if it makes me just a little bit uncomfortable. We had a mentor who would always say, your experience of God is smaller than who God is. Your experience of God does not limit God. It does not encompass God. You do not comprehend God. You encounter God. You interact with God. But God is huge and immense and forever and all of those things. All of those things, I just think it's good to be able to say, thank you for the journey so far. But what I've experienced so far is not the only possibility of what it looks like to trust God through Jesus. And so, as a pastoral point, I want to say to someone who's experiencing disillusionment and feeling their only option is deconstruction, and maybe even a devastating version of deconstruction. Jesus is bigger than your experience of him so far. There are other possibilities that may fit you better than you realize. Be open to that possibility. Become a seeker again.
I love that so much. That's really the heart. What you just said is the heartbeat of what I'm hoping everybody gets from this whole conversation, is that God is more. And for sure, in my limited understanding, I won't understand everything. There's no way for me to understand all the questions I have. I have unanswered prayers. I have unanswered questions. And yet, I have chosen to hang in there. Now, some people would call that naive and backward or something. But for me, this is working well for me. Even though I don't understand everything, I don't find for myself another way to live. As we move into the next idea here, bringing this conversation into just how the first half of life, midlife, and the second half of life work. Through all of those three formational areas of my life, I have made decisions to stay. I had, and I know you had, Alan, you can share yours in a minute. I had a definite midlife experience, and midlife by any definition is disorienting. It is a disorientation. It is Abbott David, who was one of my early mentors, said, midlife is when the car runs out of gas, and then you find out that the car doesn't run on gas anymore. And so you literally,
oh man.
I mean, that's what it feels like, right? The car stalled and I don't know how to move it forward. And so you're in this place, nothing makes sense. And I remember specifically deep in the heart of midlife, there was anger, there was regret, there was sadness, there questions. Yeah. I remember that was the time when I prayed those very honest prayers that you would find in the Psalms, very much like, how long, O Lord? You know, those Psalms that sound like, how could you let this happen? How long will you allow this? I remember all of that coming up. And I don't remember exactly being horribly tempted to throw everything away, but those emotions were there. You know, you don't get me wrong. It was like, what is this? What is this? What is this faith? What is God? What is everything at that point, though? That's what midlife does. What is everything?
Yeah.
I still think there's a way, which is what I think you said earlier, to hold on or to maybe be with God in the turmoil. I think it's true that you're with God in any version, right? Any one of these seasons where you're with him, he's with you in it.
Yeah.
And
that makes me think.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, in the back of my head, I'm picturing, I've been reading the Gospel of John since the beginning of the year, number of months now. And so a number of times I've come through John 6, which is the long sort of passage where at the end of it, some of his disciples leave. They fully deconstruct. They just said, we're done.
Can't do that.
No more. This is that whole eating his flesh, drinking his blood. That's too much, man. I can't go there. And I love Peter when Jesus says, what about you? Are you going to leave too? And Peter's response is, well, so where would we go? Like, you're the one with the words of eternal life. I think you and I both have a pretty strong sort of sense of there isn't a plan B, not a workable plan B. It's either this works or I don't know what in the world we do. So we just keep leaning in and seeking and trying to learn what might a new orientation for our life with God look like in this next season. And how will it be similar? How will it be a continuation? And how will it be fresh and new and different, maybe?
For sure. Well, can you mention just briefly for you, Alan, personally, what that disorientation aspect of midlife felt like?
Yeah, so I think maybe the most potent version of that experience for me was that the year I turned 40 was also the year you and I took a 1 year sabbatical. That's now 25 years ago. Just amazing to think that. And so that sabbatical coupled with turning 40 and just kind of the quintessential midlife year, I guess you could say. Who am I if I'm not Pastor Alan? If I'm not doing all the things I've always done that sort of establish my identity and make me feel important. And, you know, my experience as a pastor was very tied into my experience of faith. There was a professional element, but wasn't just a thing I did for money. It was a life that I'd felt called to. And so there was the identity thing was huge for me. Like, am I what I do? Am I what I accomplish? Am I what everyone else thinks of me? All those Henry Nouwen identity things we've talked about on this podcast so many times. Or especially in a season of disorientation, especially in a sabbatical season of pausing all the normal activities. Can I just remember that I am who God says I am? All that work I did in the first half of life to establish myself and to do good things and to, you know, gain the favor of others. It's not that none of that mattered. It's just that didn't matter first. It wasn't the seek first. Part of what midlife for me was a simplifying of my sense of calling and my sense of identity. I'm just a person who's living his life with God and then seeking to do what I do with God all the time. There was a simplifying in the new orientation for me. And like I said, I just think now as I look 25 years back to that moment and kind of the path ahead, it was a significant change in trajectory for me. And most of the good things I think that God has been doing in and through me in this season of my 60s found its birth or was planted kind of in that midlife transitional.
Oh, good. I'm wondering if we could talk about suffering for just a moment, because that certainly comes in when we're talking about
that sounds fun.
I know. Let's have a moment on suffering and pain, shall we?
Oh boy.
But suffering has sometimes been described as a doorway to divine intimacy, actually, right? The sharing in the sufferings of Christ. I think Mother Teresa, that was one thing she shared a lot about. So I'm wondering how we might hold space for that deep unraveling that disorientation brings. And then maybe with the added conversation that we like to have a lot here on Unhurried Living is without either rushing through or numbing out. How can we hold space for this in ourselves?
Well, you and I both have done some writing on this theme. We've got chapters on pain or on suffering in more than one of our books. I think in An Unhurried Life, I called suffering, unexpected unhurrying. Like it's the unhurrying you don't ask for, you don't want it. But seasons of suffering, if you'll let them, will tend to slow you down to the pace of prayer or to the pace of dependence on the help of others or the pace of listening instead of always having the answer for everything that happens, or just simply the pace of love. The challenge is if you try to rush through discomfort, or you try to avoid it, or you try to distract yourself from it, or you try to numb yourself in any number of ways, it just makes the season longer. I mean, we've got that famous saying from Vincent de Paul who said, "The one who hurries delays the things of God." That comes to be true in seasons of hardship or suffering or difficulty. If you lean into them, you'll find your way into and through those places usually a little more quickly than if you keep postponing through numbing or avoiding or escaping or whatever. So I think the quickest path, not that we're trying to do everything quick, but maybe the best way in a season of suffering is with and through. instead of all of the varieties of avoiding and numbing and distracting that are so familiar to so many of us.
I am pretty sure this is a drum that you and I beat often.
Mm.
We love those words with, through,
Yeah.
in, right? Those beautiful words that really remind us that God is with us in it. And I guess I'm not embarrassed to say we're just going to say them again. Because
Yeah.
what I'm hearing us say is no matter what season of life you're in, whatever reorientation, disorientation, as best you can with what you've got at the time, you can just remember that God is with you. Even if that doesn't make the pain go away or make anything happen faster or even feel like it solves anything in the moment, that withness is what will carry you through until you get to that next new orientation. Don't you think?
Yeah. A thought that's kind of bubbling around the back of my head, maybe it's worth sharing, and that is all of this is why it's so critical that people's experience of faith is more than knowledge about God.
Oh, yes.
If all you have is knowledge about God in some doctrinal system or some theological school or whatever it is, then you don't have a personal connection to hold on to when the faith system doesn't work the way it used to. Like that's in a sense what you and I find we can still hold on to. And that's in a real sense what the psalm writer in that new orientation passage I read says, I'm going to think back to those moments with God I've had along the way because they were real. We knew they were real. We believed they were real. There was something substantial that happened in us. There was something fruitful that happened through us, something undeniable, something almost scientifically provable from evidence if you have to go down a route like that. And so this is why helping people experience God, experience trust and not just belief, that's also important because that's what you can hold on to or seek in some fresh way when disorientation becomes the familiar companion.
Yeah, I think that is a really, really important aspect of what we're talking about here. It's almost like we're doubling down on the gospel promise we were given way back at the beginning. When I was first starting out as a teenager, someone said to me, would you like to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? And that
Yeah.
was, in a way, a kind of formula, a formulaic question to get people to make a decision. I understand all that. But there's a real truth, a life truth in that question. Would you? Yes, I would like a, what does that mean? Well, it's taking me a lifetime to figure out what that means.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. And the living out of the answer to that question is far more than just, I think is what you're saying, than just a theological treatise or some knowledge base.
Yeah.
It's more than that. It's an embodiment.
It,
It's a relationship. So, well, we've
yes.
talked about suffering, talked about deconstruction. Let just one more before we head to new orientation. Let's talk about lament for a moment. And we're bringing these
Mm.
things up because, again, what we said at the beginning is we're trying to normalize. It's grief happens. Life is hard, right? Suffering happens, and so lament, right, can, and especially the Psalms of lament, can actually give us language in disorientation. Because
Yeah.
sometimes, harkening back to the deconstruction conversation, I wonder if some people who deconstruct don't actually believe there's a way for them to do what they're doing in God's presence.
Right.
Right.
Well, I
And we're
mean,
saying you can.
yeah, I mean, someone, I forget the count, Brueggemann talks about this, but maybe more of the Psalms are Psalms of lament than almost any other category. Minimally, you can just say there's a whole lot of them.
Yeah.
And it'd be fair to ask the question, to what degree does that reality um, come to be at home in my way of communing with God?
Mm.
Am I able to bring my questions humbly, honestly, um, into the presence of God as best I can. And for some, again, their vision of prayer is just saying nice things to God that we think God wants to hear. Well, pretty soon that just runs flat. It doesn't feel like it has any substance, mainly because it doesn't have any substance. And so God wants to have a relationship with us as we actually are now. He doesn't want to have a relationship with a theoretical me that's mostly got everything together or knows how to hide the bad things somewhere that theoretically he can't see. All of this just sounds silly to say, since God already knows me better than I know myself. He knows what I'm made of. He knows how I stumble. He knows how I come up short. He knows my weaknesses. And he loves me and wants to live in communion with me. He pays an immense price for that in the loving sacrifice of his son. He wants a relationship with me as I find myself now. And it's in the presence of God that I find the healing or the fresh trust or the comfort or whatever it is I'm feeling a deep, deep need for. I find that with God. And so if I don't pray my disorientation, it just sort of festers in me and it becomes something really unhelpful. But if I bring that into the presence of God, it can be an opportunity to relearn, unlearn, to come to places of fresh trust.
So good. I'm wondering, Alan, not to put you on the spot, but you're usually really good at this. We'll find out. Do you remember which of Brueggemann's books would be good for someone to read if they wanted to hear him talk about this orientation, disorientation, new orientation? Maybe if you're going to look that up, I'm going to go ahead to the next question. I can start answering that myself. But if you could figure that out, I think that would be great. Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember reading one. I think it was, the title of it was something like The Spirituality of the Psalms.
Okay.
That may not be the main one, but I think if you found a book by Brueggemann on Psalms like that one, there's a
he
good
would probably
chance
bring that
he
up.
would be talking about.
Yeah. So if you wanted to dive deeper into this whole thing and get it straight from Brueggemann, that's what we're. So let's end on what might be an uplifting note, which might be just, let's talk about reorientation or new orientation just for a moment. Mm-hmm. And for me, because I'm old enough to be in the second half of life, I've done first half, midlife, I'm in the second half. And even just how God has been moving in me and working with me over the course of time, I have found myself in what I might call a new orientation. When I was coming through a time of disorientation, I remember in semi-recent years, my spiritual director actually said, Jem, I think, because we were talking about in terms of deconstruction, there were things I was letting go of, right? He said, yep. I think it sounds to my ear like you're moving to reconstruction, which I think is another word for new orientation. Something fresh is being built. You know, yes. I got rid of that which didn't serve me. And one of the things I had to really move through was there was a temptation to hate or despise my own methods or things I fell for or was taught or whatever in the first half or early years. But once you move through disorientation to new orientation, I think there's a softening that happens. And I don't look back and judge or critique and go, what was all that? Why did that happen? Why didn't they say it this way? Because you could blame if you want. Sure. And in midlife, sure, there was a lot of blame. But when you get over to this other part of new orientation, you don't have to blame anymore. It almost comes naturally once you've done the work of the lament and the letting go. And so more often now, when I think back, I can look back in gratitude because one choice you could make is instead of bad mouthing what didn't go right, because nobody's perfect, couldn't you just be grateful for the goodness that did occur in any one of those seasons? Because goodness,
absolutely.
I mean, earlier you were talking about you were a Baptist that ran into the contemplative, and how was that going to work out? The beautiful thing that I give full credit to the Baptists for. I came to my early growth as a teenager was in a Baptist church. And I'll tell you what, they highlighted the scriptures. We were memorizing. The
Yes, we
teaching
were.
was just going through scripture. And so even though I don't have a biblical degree, and I don't even claim to have close just because I've heard a lot of sermon, I'm saying we had solid, beautiful, scriptural teachings. I have verses memorized now in my 60s that I memorized when I was 19. So the Baptists gave me that. This is what I'm saying. Whatever stream you came up through and whatever streams God interwove to make you who you are now, every one of them has a beautiful gift that you could receive and be grateful for. I think that's a part of new orientation. You're grateful, you're content. There's a contentment, there's a greater peace. And it's not even something you're trying for, it's something that emerges because of the journey you've been on. Does that ring true for you?
Yeah, I'm playing around in my head with a metaphor. I don't know if this will work. We'll see if this makes it to the final episode or not. It's not a new one. It's not an unusual one. It's just, I wonder sometimes if maybe our orientation is like the caterpillar and our disorientation is like the cocoon.
Yeah.
And therefore, the metamorphosis of new orientation is something unexpected, something beautiful, something new, something you couldn't have necessarily seen it in the caterpillar. Sort of, but sort of not. So I think sometimes new orientation can be that dramatically transformative. But I also think sometimes our new orientation can just look like our original orientation, maybe with a little bit deeper roots or a little bit broader perspective. I mean, to your point and to your story a minute ago, I've been walking with Jesus for 45 plus years now. And because of those early years in very Bible-oriented churches, I still have an internal map of the scripture that just lives in me. Yeah. If I want to go find something in scripture, I know the places to look. I had a season where I memorized the book of Philippians because the drive from my house to the church was exactly how long it took to say Philippians out loud. And I did that for months. And I got to where I had the whole thing memorized in the old NIV, the 1984 version, which was brand new back then. Right. So that's in me. All of that's in me. But now it's in me in a new way alive. That maybe then it was more just getting the words right and being able to impress everybody that I'd memorized the book of Philippians and like all those young sort of faith things. Now, maybe all of that is seed that has grown and begun to bear fruit in my character, fruit in my vision of life, fruit in my way of interacting with people, fruit in the way I do the work I do. So new orientation can be new in the sense that it's a refreshed orientation, or it can be new in the sense that something just metamorphosis and oh my goodness, it's very new.
Yeah. I love that image. I mean, for sure this is going to make it in because because the butterfly doesn't look back at the caterpillar and go, "What were you thinking? What were you doing?" No, all of it was this beautiful, beautiful process that if we had butterflies one time in our backyard, we watched it happen. We watched the caterpillars. We had a plant that they loved and they ate it. And then all these cocoons just were hanging from these leaves. And then we watched all of their fritillaries. They made
fritillaries they were.
Yes. They made their way out of the cocoon in that way they have to, where they have to strain. So that's the other beautiful part of that process is they have to do the fighting to get out of the cocoon to be able to fly.
Yeah.
And so everything we're talking about, God has already proclaimed in nature. It's the way things work. And so wherever you find yourself in this process, it's okay. You're not wrong. It's happening because this is how life goes. So I'm wondering at the end here, Alan, let's put on spiritual director hat, pastoral care hat one more time, which I think we've had on the whole time. But if someone feels a little lost right now inside of their disorientation, or if there's someone who feels like they're deconstructing and they're angry and they're not sure how they're going to make their way. I don't know if you can treat both of those people in an equal place, but maybe you can. Is there an encouragement or a practice or something that you would offer that would help them right now as they are?
Yeah. So if you find yourself, if disoriented feels like the most familiar place, it feels
Yeah.
probably this is home and it's not a very comfortable home. It feels like a house that's halfway through a remodel and I just don't feel like I can relax anywhere in this place. One of the things that I would want to say is ask God to help you find somebody who's made their way through a season like this already. One of the problems we sometimes have is we look for counsel from people who are completely at home in orientation. Well, they don't have a lot of help for us in disoriented places. It's working just fine for them. So they're likely to give you easy answers. This is how, just do more of this. You'll be all set. You'll be fine. No, what you need is find someone. Maybe they're going to be a little bit older than you. Maybe they have suffered a bit, but they have made their way somehow through a season of disorientation and they've come to a place of deeper faith. That person could meet you, whether your disorientation is a very angry, frustrated, disappointing variety, or whether it's just puzzling and confusing and I just don't know what to do next. I want there to be a next, but I don't know what it is. So part of this is don't try to navigate this kind of a season alone. We were meant to be a community. Faith is a communal reality. And there's times when the body of Christ can hold us or carry us through seasons of struggle or disillusionment that we just can't navigate all alone. Love can do what a whole lot of teaching and advice can't do. So I would just say, ask God to show you somebody who maybe has had this experience of moving through disorientation into some sort of new orientation, and just share as honestly as you can with them and see if perhaps they can empathize, and maybe they'll, rather than have 5 easy steps to overcome disorientation, maybe they'll just be willing to walk alongside you a while.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Having quality people to link arms with is just critical in any season of life, but especially when it's difficult. We just having that listening ear or a shoulder to cry on, or just someone to listen while you process. Now, this is obviously why we recommend having a spiritual director or
Yeah.
some kind of formation coach or even therapist. If it comes to that, you don't have to be alone. But even finding, like Alan said, a really good, solid human being that you would trust to journey with you in that would be amazing.
I think so.
Well, Alan, yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to say about anything we've said before we wrap this up?
Well, I guess I would just want to say there is always hope.
Yeah.
This is again why I think it helps us sometimes to remember we're a part of a community. And maybe the community that you're currently in, you're just mostly getting easy answers that don't work for you. You may have to widen your vision a little bit to find the hope of the whole body of Christ and some expression of it that could become a place of help for you. Don't lose hope. Remember those moments that you knew were real with God. Let those be a kind of seed that could perhaps guide you forward in the journey.
And then going back to the metaphor of the butterfly, maybe it's just let it be okay that maybe you're in the cocoon right now. Maybe that could be okay. Well, thank you, Alan. I'm so glad we talked about this. I hope that people are helped. If you're listening on the podcast, well, there's nowhere to put a comment, is there, on a podcast? Is there? If you're on the podcast, leave a review. That'd be great. If you're watching on YouTube and this struck a chord with you, we'd love for you to leave a comment and just let us know where you find yourself. We love connecting with people and just finding out where you're at. And we're hoping that we're bringing hopefully a little bit of wisdom, encouragement to your life.
Yeah,
so
I hope so.
Thanks
Been good
so
to have the
much.
conversation.
Thank you for joining me on the Unhurried Living Podcast. You can download free resources and learn more about us at unhurriedliving.com. And please subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. We'd also like to thank our partner, Life Audio. Check out their other faith-centered podcasts at lifeaudio.com. Blessings to you as you make your way.